Yasas. What happens when you take two vibrant brothers that are descendants from the Greeks in Constantinople, embracing their American roots, and then ask them to serve up rich tales of traditions, cuisine, childhood memories, and a hearty dose of humor? You're about to find out. This is Baklavine Banter, your passport to all things Greek.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Baklava and Banter. I am Petraki, and this guy here is the king of Dolmadakia. You are...
Soto.
Hello.
Hey.
So, hey, everybody, it's been a while since we've been on, but welcome to another episode. We are pleased today to have author of the book, Hydra in the Winter, all the way from Australia. Please help us welcome Shelley Dark. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's wonderful to be here. And hi, Soto.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
So this book is, wow. I just have to say, one wonderful book, well written. One of my biggest takeaways, you have some great, whether or not, I don't know if anybody's told you this, you have some wonderful quotes in here that people can take out of this. And I don't know if you intended that or not, but it's just wonderful, especially with the character development. So this story about Gigas Vulgaris, let's start off with that. So about 20 years ago, your son came to you and found out that he and his father were related to one of the first Australian convicts who was Greek.
Exactly, Peter. You can imagine, well, you can't imagine. I mean, you would have thought that we in the family would have known that, but there had
Yeah.
never been any mention of it. I'm guessing because back in the 1950s, when John was a little boy, people didn't want a convict in their history. You know, they wanted to have been
Sure.
free settlers. Bit different now. Everybody wants a convict in the family. But yes, and to discover, not only that you've got a convict in the family, but he was Greek. I mean, convicts in Australia were English, they were
Right.
poor, they were felons, they weren't Greek. Or they weren't perceived to be Greek, and they certainly weren't pirates. So to discover that you have a Greek pirate in the family, I mean, it's a bit like discovering you've got Zorba or Johnny Depp, or it really did blow me away to find
Yeah.
that out. And of
Yeah.
course, my husband was very surprised too.
Yeah. Were you just as surprised when years later, after you found out that he bought you the ticket in 2017 for Christmas to go to Hydra?
Yes, that was pretty surprising. It made me very happy, Peter. He knew how much in the intervening years, what was it, another 13 or so years later, I had
Yeah.
done everything in those 13 years to try to find out about Geekas. I'd been to Sydney, I'd been to Canberra, I'd been to where he eventually settled down on the Monero, I'd been to archives, national libraries, I'd searched online, but I just couldn't find out exactly who he was. There was a Greek ambassador to an Australian ambassador to Greece, called Adam Gilchrist, and he
Right.
wrote 3 volumes of books called Greek Australians, and that turned out to be my best springboard at the time because he devoted 3 chapters to these boys. But apart from that, there was very little I could find out. So yes, when I got the ticket to Hydra, I was so excited. I thought, this is it. This is my big chance to find out who this boy was.
Yeah. And, and this journey, as you write this book, your journey, kind of the cast of characters start off right away. Let's start with Duncan, who was the English super yacht captain. Now, when I'm reading about this guy, I'm thinking like Patrick Stewart. I'm thinking like Sean Connery. Is this kind of his persona in this?
Well, like that will do. That will do, Peter. I don't know. I don't know if Duncan sees himself as the Sean Connery type. He probably does. I'll have to email him and tell him you said that. But I mean, what were the chances of sitting? I hadn't been in that seat the day before. He hadn't been in his seat the day before, and we
Right.
both changed seats. And for me to end up, talking about a Greek pirate and talking about, even if I wanted to write a book, I couldn't because I've never been on a sailing boat. How would I ever find out about the Mediterranean or the currents or anything about sailing the Mediterranean? And to have the man next to you say, well, I am a super yacht captain in the Mediterranean. You can
Yeah.
imagine how that blew me away. I mean,
Yeah.
everything right from that moment seemed as if it was meant to be.
100%. 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
My brother would tell you, I don't believe in coincidences. Everything in life happens for a reason.
I'm
Destiny
with
brought
you.
the two of you together.
Exactly.
But didn't he at some point kind of um say to you that you look like a writer?
No, that was the
Didn't he kind of
that,
validate you?
that was the taxi driver in Greece.
Oh, that was the
In
taxi driver in
Athens,
Greece.
I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
in Athens, yeah. He said to me, what do you do? I said, I'm a writer. He said, you look like a writer. And that's when I
Yes.
thought I was glad I hadn't said I was a welder.
That was Evangelos in the taxi driver.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yes,
Exactly.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So you get on a plane, you take a boat, you get on a plane, you make it to Athens. Was that your first time in Athens?
Yes, it was. It was my first time in Greece. We'd been
Yeah.
travelling. We retired in 2008 as cattle
Mm-hmm.
growers and went to the beach. And so
Yeah.
we'd been travelling for, a lot, ever since we stopped working. But I just hadn't
Mm-hmm.
been to Greece. I mean, it was on the list.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, so that was the first time. And it was just like being in a movie set, that you've
Mm-hmm.
seen a million
Sure.
times.
Sure.
Oh, so thrilling, so exciting to get there.
And it has its own vibe. It kind of
Absolutely.
like, and it's one thing I tell my brother all the time who hasn't been in a long time. The city kind of embraces you.
Yes, absolutely.
Excuse me. So then after that, you go ahead and you make it to the island of Hydra.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, in this, it seems like um, the island is more than a backdrop. It's almost a character within the book itself.
Yes, it really is. When you're approaching by sea, as you do, Hydra doesn't yell at you. It doesn't proclaim itself. You can hardly see it
Mm-hmm.
until you're almost upon it. And you can see why, because, in the sort of the centuries when it was settled, sort of in the 1500s, 1400s,
Mm-hmm.
1500s, it was important not to be obvious to pirate attack. And so that first that first glimpse of it, when you can't see it and then suddenly it opens up in front of you. And I had seen in the Menaki Museum a watercolour by a
Mm-hmm.
fellow called Hope in 1795. And when I saw that
Right.
first shot of Hydra as the ferry came in, I thought, oh my goodness, it is exactly the same. Maybe a few more houses now, but it looks
Yeah.
identical. And I knew that it was, from Googling and searching, I knew that it was a very rough island,
Mm-hmm.
dry, very stony,
Yeah.
very forbidding with a sort of a mountainous backbone. And so I knew it wasn't a
Yeah.
very hospitable island as far as, human beings being able to live there. And yet when you
Mm-hmm.
come in and those houses are snuggled into that inlet with the hills all around them, it has a very intimate feeling, you know, when you first see it, which is a beautiful welcome. And then to get there in winter, when all the photos you've seen are of summer, when it's baked
Mm-hmm.
brown and wall to wall tourists, you can't put a cigarette paper between them. And suddenly
Yeah.
to be there in winter when you could shoot a cannon and you'd be flat out hitting a donkey, that was quite magical. You know, I felt
Yeah.
when you've got something to yourself by that, like when you get up at dawn in a place you don't know, when all the locals
Mm-hmm.
aren't up, you sort of feel you own a place, you know, because you're appreciating it when the locals aren't paying attention. And that was how
Mm-hmm.
I felt about Hydra, I think, that it
Mm-hmm.
was like a person. And it normally, I think if you went in summer, it would have that buzzy resort feeling. But
Mm-hmm.
Hydra in winter doesn't have that buzz. It has a very quiet, introspective feel about it. You know, people aren't busy. They're taking their time. They're resting after that frantic tourist season, getting ready for the next one. And so that, I mean, the locals were amazingly warm. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, because I was reading all the history and that no war is ever any different, and the Greek War of Independence, as you know, or the
Yeah.
Revolution, as we call it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, it was no different from any war. There were dreadful atrocities on both sides.
Sure.
And so I think when you come into a place as a stranger, locals never know, not that they knew I was going to write about it, but locals never
Right.
know how you're going to interpret a place, do they? And so there's a certain
Yeah.
reserve, there's a great hospitality, but also a reserve when you start to ask questions about history. So, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it was a person. And I had read a lot of first-hand accounts of Hydra in sort of in the 1700s, in that century where Europeans, wealthy Europeans, did the European tour and they would keep
Yeah.
diaries. And so I read quite a few of those diaries which described Hydra and its people and how they were secretive, how they were
Uh-huh.
rowdy, how they were beautifully dressed, better dressed than anywhere in Europe, which was very interesting to me. And then, of course, I began to realise just how very wealthy they'd been at the time Geekus was alive. And so,
Yeah.
yes, the whole Idra took on its own personality, yes, which is what I think you were asking me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you in the book you talk about how the you find out when you realize that the apartment that you're staying at may have been owned by
Yes.
the by Geekus relatives. How did that come to be?
Now, did you just ask me the mansion that I stayed in? Is that what you
Yes.
said? Yes,
Yes.
yes, Peter. Before I went, I knew I wanted
Okay.
to be on the harbour. I mean, I doubt you
Okay.
could afford to stay for a couple of weeks on the harbour in
Okay.
summer, but because this was winter, I knew I wanted to stay on the harbour. And
Okay.
there was a very smart hotel called the Idria Hotel, and it
Yep.
was closed for the season, as was many of the hotels and the Airbnbs. But this
Okay.
particular one was called the White House, and it was directly underneath this terribly smart hotel, which I knew had been owned by a ship owner. And
Okay.
it was only later that, and see another coincidence, what serendipity, whatever you call it. It was only
Yeah.
later that I found out it was a Vulgaris mansion. So although not Geeka's father's mansion, it was his
Yeah.
uncle's. It was his uncle's mansion, which was
Yeah.
another amazing piece of serendipity to know that he could have stood in that room that I was sleeping in.
Yeah. That's crazy, right?
Crazy.
Because in here, and I'm gonna quote you is You say, standing here, I feel the weight of history, ships, wealth, war, and ambition.
Mm.
What did you mean by what? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Well, before I ever heard of Geekus, I didn't know a
Mm-hmm.
lot about Hydra, and I didn't realise, even when I first started reading about it, I didn't realise how very, very wealthy that tiny
Mm-hmm.
little island had become through shipbuilding, but through trading during the Napoleonic Wars. And I'm sure I'm not
Mm-hmm.
telling you anything you don't know, but during the Napoleonic Wars, they had been able to fly under the Russian flag through the Bosphorus into the Black
Mm-hmm.
Sea, pick up Russian wheat, and then run
Mm-hmm.
it to Europe in defiance of the English blockade of Europe. The
Okay.
English were trying to starve Napoleon out, and so they were patrolling those waters to stop people, getting
Yeah.
supplies
Yeah.
in. And so you could charge a lot of money, obviously, to run that
Mm-hmm.
blockade, and they did. So they became very clever, at trading and at making money from it, but also at slipping through blockades and evading other ships. And so when I got into that mansion, I
Mm-hmm.
just thought to myself, this is right on the, where I was the first floor up. Underneath me was shops, which would have
Yeah.
been the mansion also originally. But I thought
Mm-hmm.
this where I am probably would have been offices. They probably
Okay.
would have been discussing manifests and, sending ships out from here. They would have
Mm-hmm.
been planning during the war. Because it's right on the harbour, I just felt that it would have been very deeply involved, A,
Mm-hmm.
in all of that trading that went on, but B, in the war itself. And I just felt Geekus at that stage was still a huge enigma to me, but
Okay.
the whole thing of Hydra and its prosperity made me think of ambition and wanting to be rich and powerful. And I just felt that somehow he was caught up in that. Now I feel as if he's my brother. Now I feel as if I know him really well.
Yeah.
But at that stage, I didn't know him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
He was very elusive for a long time.
He certainly was.
And, I love how you mention the black cat, which is named Skotadi. Um, and the symbolism of that, it seems like he followed you home.
He did follow me home, yes, Peter. But yes, he insisted on following me home and coming inside and staying
Yeah.
and, winding himself around my ankles constantly. Yes, he totally adopted me. And he wasn't the only black thing, though, that happened to me. And you talk about coincidences or fate or serendipity or whatever.
Yeah.
But I particularly noticed his blackness, if you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean. And then when I went on a hike up to the Prophetess Ilias Monastery, which is
Yeah.
1,500 feet up above the town, quite steeply,
Mm-hmm.
I ran into a girl who had a black dog with her, a black Labrador dog. And that, and was particularly taken with that dog as well. And
Hmm.
then when it came to the end of the book and Maria texted me to tell me about Mr. Mavroderos, I won't be
Mm-hmm.
telling you anything you won't know, but I didn't know that Mavroderos also means blackish.
It
And
does. Yeah.
so suddenly when someone said that to me, I thought I'd been getting little signs all the way along.
Yeah.
Take notice of the word black. And
Yeah.
so it was, in fact, Mr. Mavroderos who led me to find out who Geekus was eventually after this book was over.
Well, I'm gonna give you one more thing here. I have a cat,
Do you?
and
And,
and she's it's like a grayish cat. She's a Russian blue cat,
oh,
and
beautiful.
her name is Nyx. Nyx is the goddess of darkness in Greek.
Oh, how lovely. That's
Well,
beautiful.
my brother will tell you how lovely she is. She's
Oh,
she's a trained assassin.
She really?
She's not afraid of mice. We'll say that much.
Oh, I thought Soto was going to say he's afraid of her.
Well,
No, I'm actually allergic to cats, and
Oh,
yeah,
Soto, so
seems
you
to have
stay well
acclimated
away.
to me, so that's a good thing.
yeah. She doesn't run away anymore. She kind of is like, "Hey, how are you? Good to see you."
Yeah,
Um, but going back to the cats, you talk about loitering through Hydra, um, and how you kind of you let the island guide you. You didn't guide yourself, and kind of pulled you
yes.
to different locations.
Mm,
Um, how was that? Was it just something like you just went with the feelings and kind of just
yes.
walked on the streets there?
Peter, when I
Yeah,
arrived, I've got that work ethic, I've got the list, the things
yeah,
I want to find out, things I want to do, and I'm going to go tick,
yeah,
tick, 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 do everything I want, and by the time I leave, I'm going to have my full list done. But
yeah.
Idra's not like that, I found. Idra wasn't going to feel that urgency that I felt. And so
Mm-hmm.
it didn't take me very long to work out that if I was in a hurry, no one else was going to be in a hurry with me. I
Yeah,
needed to
yeah,
settle myself down, relax, and just breathe a little,
yeah,
and just
yeah,
wander. And so it was the island that really helped me to do that. And,
yeah.
that sort of echoed Daniel Klein's book that I had taken with me, Travels with
Mm-hmm.
Epicurus. He talks
Yeah,
about living andante. And that's
yeah,
what Idra tells you to do, doesn't it? You really
yeah,
just no
yeah,
choice but to just
yeah.
slow down. Hmm.
Uh, my brother is a fan of Daniel Klein.
Oh, it's great, isn't he?
Anything Epicurean for me, just the idea of living large and hanging out with friends and things like
Yes,
that. I just think it's
yes,
interesting that when you had said, and you just mentioned it, that you loved writers like Clift and Klein and so forth. That Klein wrote that book, and we talked about how Idra comes across as a character. If you're patient and you're willing to let yourself be guided by the island, it rewards you. And I think it's.
excellent.
I told my brother, it reminds me, if you remember the series Lost,
Hmm.
about the passengers that ended up on an island, and the whole thing with that series was, were they in purgatory and so forth. The both your description and then Klein's description of Idra kind of reminded me of that show, because the island had its own personality that would basically guide the arc of the protagonist, which in this case, in your book, you're the protagonist. And so,
Yes.
anyway, I thought that was kind of cool.
Thank you, Soto. And further to that point, it was
Yeah.
very important that I was there by myself. People have said to me, gee whiz,
Mm-hmm.
traveling alone, aren't you scared or aren't you? And you have to be alone to do a trip like that, to
Mm-hmm.
absorb an island, to absorb a place. You need to be alone. I love
Mm-hmm.
traveling with my husband, I love traveling with girlfriends, but if you do that, half of your attention is on the people you're traveling with. If you're
Mm-hmm.
alone, you can absorb the whole place. You
Understood. Yep.
engage more with the people, you look more carefully at everything you see. And I think being a writer is a little bit like being a painter, in that they look at something and they think,
Mm-hmm.
how would I mix the colour to show that shadow or that light at the end of that alley? As a writer, I find now, if I'm alone and I can concentrate, I'm
Yeah.
looking at something and thinking, how can I get that on the page? What words can I use to take my reader there so that they really can see what I'm seeing without ever seeing it?
Yeah.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm,
100%. And in that chapter where you are kind of just loitering through Hydra, you have a great quote, and I love this, and I understand it. And it says, Hydra doesn't make it easy to find anything. It's like a gorgeous, lazy cat that stretches out and says, yes, I'm fabulous. Figure it out yourself. That's my cat.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She knows she's beautiful. Okay.
She sounds
But
gorgeous.
when I read that, I was like, I know exactly what she means by this.
Yes. And do you know, Peter, I think that's why Hydra has stayed unspoiled.
Hmm.
Because it doesn't, it's not going to change an awning because it's rusty. It's not
Yeah.
going to schmick things up to make it look like a fashionable. It doesn't look fashionable. There's nothing fashionable looking about
Yeah.
Hydra. It
Yeah.
makes, I mean, obviously the hospitality's there, but it makes very little effort to make itself look like an international resort. And I think that's why people love it so much, because it
Yeah.
is so unspoiled and doesn't
Yeah.
make a huge effort to look, like an international.
Yeah.
Yes, don't you think?
Hydra knows who Hydra is. That's what it
Exactly.
is. Yeah. Yeah. Talk to me about this map marker labeled the spoil shop and the pulley system they had there. How high was it? Was it taking it from the waterfront up the hill? Was that what
Yes.
it is?
Yes, it was. It was. I didn't notice what was going down below. I was looking
Okay.
up at a balcony and I saw a woman up on a balcony with very long hair and she was in
Yeah.
her nightgown. So that
Yeah.
caught my attention. I thought, oh, there's someone in their pajamas. And so
Yeah.
I looked up and that's when I noticed that she was pulling on a rope. So, yes,
Yeah.
she was pulling it up 3 stories, the rope, and her friend was down below who had tied the rope to the basket of groceries. So the friend had obviously done the shopping for her
Yeah.
and she was, yes, pulling it up to her balcony. Very inventive, I thought.
D-
Wonderful.
did a lot of the homes have that?
Well, I didn't see anyone else doing it, Peter, but it's good sense, isn't it?
It does. It is. You
It
know.
appeals to my lazy bones.
So let's moving on. You talk about how you thought how the 17th and 1800s how Hydra would look, and you talk about the Hydrakis, the boats, the specialized shipbuilding that was taken on the
Hmm.
island.
Hmm.
How did you come to stumble upon that?
On the Hydrakis.
Yeah.
Peter, if there's anything I haven't stumbled upon to do with Hydra, I'd be very surprised. I must have read. Yes, I've just read endlessly. I've read
Okay.
every single thing, I think. I've read about 4 books on the revolution. I've
Okay.
read, yes, I've read all of those accounts that I was telling you about written by tourists at that
Yeah.
time. And I've even looked at shipbuilding, how to build ships. In the archives there's a fantastic display which was extremely helpful to me. They have enormous models of ships. I don't mean little ones. They're not full size, but they are
Mm-hmm.
big models, which help me enormously as somebody who doesn't understand anything about ships, help me
Mm-hmm.
enormously to understand how they're built. And
Mm-hmm.
also, when you see these wonderful little boats in the harbour, my photos of Hydra on the tourist side, which is
Mm-hmm.
full in summer, there's nothing in my photos. It's totally empty. On my side of the harbour, where my apartment was, are all the
Mm-hmm.
local fishing boats. And
Okay.
so I just had to open my window, and that's what I could see, all these
Sure.
fabulous, fabulous boats. One Sunday, it was Apocries, I think, there was a man and his wife
Yeah.
mending nets, yellow nets,
Okay.
along that rock groin, and they had
Mm-hmm.
on a radio playing bouzouki music, and
Mm-hmm.
the ships were rocking in the harbour and the seagulls were flying overhead. Oh my goodness, it was absolutely magical. In your wildest dreams of a Greek island, you couldn't
Yeah.
dream better, than I
Yeah.
saw. Mm.
Because you happen to be there, fortunate enough to be there for the carnival there.
Yes, I was
Um,
there for the carnival, which was great.
and it kind of like it showed you almost a different personality of the people in the island, where they were a little more, instead of being a little more relaxed, they were a little more mischievous and with masks and all that. Did that surprise you? That aspect of the island?
Yes, it did a bit. It did that. It was obviously totally embraced by the
Yeah.
community. In our communities, we have carnivals and we have processions, but
Mm-hmm.
generally it's a small part of each community that's doing it, isn't it? This
Yeah.
was the full community. I don't think there was
Yeah.
anyone who wasn't there. All the grannies, the great grannies, the babies,
Mm-hmm.
everyone was there, and everyone was dressed up for this pretend wedding that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was really, and they had put an enormous amount into their costumes. But I think what
Yeah.
struck me the most is what you said, that, and Daniel Klein mentions this too. There's something to be said, especially the more and more pressured that modern life becomes. There's something to be said for just having fun, for just
Yeah.
doing things for no other reason than just to have
Yeah.
fun and be silly.
Yeah, because you go ahead and say it's still a glorious excuse for adults to dress up and embrace their inner child. No judgment allowed.
Exactly, exactly. And the
Yeah.
dancing on the quay, they do a big arc from behind in the main square behind the port. Then they go up
Yeah.
behind the town, round right down to
Yeah.
Vlekos, I think, and back along the coast to the port. And then they dance. They danced for hours and hours and hours. It
Yeah.
was magical to watch, really.
I can just imagine being a carnival that there was some spectacular food there as well.
Spectacular. The food on Hydra, I mean, all Greek food, I guess, was
Yeah.
just magical. And because I was there out of the season,
Yeah.
admittedly, a lot of the restaurants were closed for the
Sure.
season, but the ones that were open really for the locals. And a
Yeah.
lot of the time, I was the only customer, and so. People were cooking specially for me, which was just wonderful. I'd go
Yeah.
walking around the port, and Katerina at Piatto would call out
Uh-huh.
and say, "I've got dolmades for you for your lunch today." Which was just absolutely magnificent. But I
Yeah.
don't think I had a bad meal. I certainly didn't cook myself. I,
Sure.
I ate every meal out, which was just
Yeah.
magical. Mm.
Was there one meal or a course that really
Really stood out.
stood out for you? Yeah.
Oh goodness, they were all so fabulous. I'd never tasted a migdalota before. That,
Okay.
and when someone gives you, Maria Vulgaris gave me a box from Auntie Flora. Auntie Flora had
Okay.
cooked it. Auntie Flora's bakery is in the main square. Maria had
Sure.
given me a box. And when you're given a box of something that you think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I don't want to
Sure.
take a
Sure.
bite and get that look on my face. And so
Yes.
I didn't eat it when she gave it to me. I took it back to the apartment. Oh, my goodness. When I ate it, and I'm not a terribly sweet tooth. Well, so maybe I am a sweet tooth. It was just divine beyond words. But so was the almond crunch. So
Yeah.
was a wonderful fish dish that I had at Condolini around at Kamini, which was
Mm-hmm.
fish and capers and tomato and onion. That was amazing. I'd never
Yeah.
had before. I'd never had, what do you call that? Taram salata.
Yeah.
Holy moly, how good is that? And a lot of these things I thought Gigas would have eaten these. There's
Sure.
nothing in this that they wouldn't have had. And
Yeah.
so the whole time I was eating, I was imagining that these are the dishes he would have eaten as well. Yes, the food was fantastic.
100%. Because
Mm.
then, because you got to think about that. You talk about the large olive tree was there,
Yes,
and,
amazing.
and so when you think about it, um, when he was on the island, he may have passed right by that olive tree as well.
Exactly, Peter.
You know.
And there were heaps of walls that he would have touched. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
key, the stones on the key are the same as they were. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it really has changed so very little in those centuries that,
Yeah.
yes, I really felt that I was seeing the Hydra that he had seen, especially up in Kamini, where the settlement
Mm-hmm.
first happened on Hydra, because it was up higher where they could see pirates or anyone attacking coming, especially up
Mm-hmm.
there where it's older, where the houses are joined together and then there are sort of arched bridges that join the
Okay.
houses, you know. So, and there are even tunnels underneath houses where the
Oh,
women of the
really?
house could visit each other, you know, because in those days, the well-born women at least didn't leave their houses. They remained in their houses. So if they wanted to socialise with each other, they had, you know, some of the houses, this is, had tunnels where they could actually go down and go to see their friends without going on the street. It was,
Yeah.
yes, it was amazing to see these houses and to see the way that the walls are thicker at the bottom to withstand the torrents that come down the gullies, you know, when it really rains, and to
Yeah.
see how the front doors never face the torrent. They always face away, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because flooding was a problem, even though it's such a
Mm-hmm.
steep island. When it floods, and you know, you only have to see the recent floods on Mykonos, etc., to realise, you know,
Mm-hmm.
how bad floods can be
Yeah.
in a steep
Yeah.
place. Yeah, so yes, it was phenomenal, really, just to see so much that he would have seen or touched or eaten. I really
Mm-hmm.
felt that I had been to Hydra as it was when he was there.
Yeah.
Mm,
And then going back to doing the research to find him, you had people like Eleni and Maria, who was your husband's cousin,
yes.
and they try to help you kind of dig down. Um, and you did the research for the evidence of his ship Heracles. Um, how helpful were they? And did they have a lot of? Did they have any information that wasn't readily available in libraries, like stuck away somewhere?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly, as you say, the ship that these boys used. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was called the Heracles, or in
Mm-hmm.
English, Hercules. I knew
Yeah.
that. And I knew there were 9 boys on board. And
Mm-hmm.
so Elaney looked, they have immaculate records of the shipping back then.
Mm-hmm.
Immaculate. You know, I looked at the book she was looking at, and it would have a column for how many cannons, a column for the
Mm-hmm.
wages that had been paid, a column for the maintenance that had been done, you know, how
Sure.
long it was, who the captain was, who owned it. And she found a ship called the Heracles,
Mm-hmm.
but it was bigger, you know, it was too big, I thought, for 9 boys. And I
Sure.
already knew that their act of piracy hadn't been very professionally done. I
Right.
already knew that that although they called themselves freedom fighters when they were tried for
Mm-hmm.
piracy, I knew that they had left behind a necessity of war, which was the sulphur in this ship that
Mm-hmm.
they robbed, which you would think freedom fighters wouldn't have done. You
Sure.
know, they didn't find the gold. There was quite a lot of gold on that ship hidden in the ballast, but they didn't find that. It
Mm-hmm.
was, they just didn't seem, these 9 boys just didn't seem to me to be professional thugs. They didn't hurt
Right.
anyone, you know, and there was plenty of violence going on with
Yeah.
pirates in those days. And so Sorry, I've lost track of your question now. Oh, talking about the Heracles. So it
Yeah.
wasn't until after I'd finished this book and I went to Malta. Now I went to Malta to look at the trial records, but it wasn't there I discovered it either. It was when I went to Kew Archives in London, and
Mm-hmm.
I was able to find the ship's log of the anti-pirate ship that apprehended them.
The
And
Gannett.
sorry?
It was the Gannett, I
Yeah,
believe.
exactly, the gannet. And so
Yeah.
when I looked in that, and I actually found the entry where it said we've apprehended a Greek pirate ship
Mm-hmm.
and with 43 men on board. And I thought, oh, 43, that doesn't sound like my boys. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I looked at the list of 43 men and they'd written down all their names, there they were, the 7 boys, the 9 boys who were
Mm-hmm.
arrested, 7 convicted. And so suddenly, if you keep going long enough and you're lucky enough, you find these things and all the chips start falling together. So that's when I thought, yes, that ship that Elaney found would have
Mm-hmm.
been the ship because there were 43 of them. And once I realised that, then I realised that the owner of that ship that Elaney found was a Vulgaris and Giga's cousin. And so everything started to gel for me then because I
Right.
knew that he had probably been erased from the family records and because he isn't in them. It was
Mm-hmm.
only through Mr. Mavroderos that I discovered who he
Yeah.
actually was. And so then things started to fall into place for me. If he lost his cousin's ship, would that be enough to have him disowned? What about if he took his cousin's ship? What about if he wasn't given permission to use
Mm-hmm.
his cousin's ship? So everything bit by bit fell into place for me, but without Eleni and Panagiotis
Mm-hmm.
finding that ship, I wouldn't have known that, and I probably wouldn't have found, anything further about it.
Yeah.
Mm.
But then as you go on in this book, you talk about, as you touched base earlier, about going up to the monastery on top of the hill there, uh, and how I believe, who was it, George? I
Yes,
think he made a
George.
comment where he asked you, where you said, "Where are you going? Are you off to conquer the world?"
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
because it was a hike to get up there.
It was a hike, Peter. It was 1,500 feet. Mind you, I appeared at an authors and writers festival a month
Yeah.
ago, and it was a travel memoir, a panel
Uh
that
huh.
I was on. On one side of me, I had a fellow who'd written a travel memoir about climbing Everest. And on
Okay.
the other side of me, I had a man who swims in icy water, in the Arctic. And
Yeah.
I sort of went a bit silent on my 1,500-foot hike
Yeah.
up to Prophetess Ilias. But
Yeah.
yes, it is a bit of a hike. I mean, certainly not difficult. But in winter, when it's pretty
Yeah.
cold, I didn't have the correct shoes. I'd worn sparkly sneakers, and that was all I'd taken because I wasn't intending to doing any. I thought I'd be in the archives solidly for 2 weeks. And so, but yes, I did get up to the top in the end, and what a view. I mean,
Yeah.
just a magnificent view of the Peloponnese,
Yeah.
of the blue sky. The Peloponnese mainland is a beautiful blue. The
Yeah.
sea is a beautiful blue, the Argolic Gulf, and then this steep drop down to the harbour that looks like a tiny little teardrop with
Yeah.
tiny little. It was absolutely magical. Yes, it was one of the highlights, really. Hmm.
So then, altogether, how long were you on the island for?
2 weeks, 2 weeks. So I think I was 3 days in Athens to begin with, and then a couple of
Okay.
days in Athens afterwards. So 2 weeks.
Because it seems when it was time for you to go, even though you weren't quite ready to go yet, it seemed like it almost became, you could have stayed there a lot longer
Mm.
if you could have.
Yes, I really could have. I was feeling very much at home. I loved the little apartment where I was. I'd
Yeah.
made so many friends. You know, it was like being in a little village to say hello to everyone every day
Hmm.
and learn something new every day too. You know, I'd find something else. I'd find a cemetery, or every day there'd be another discovery. Plus I was doing things for fun. I was having massages and, you know, doing things like that normally I would never do in a million years when I'm traveling, because I want to see the place, you know. But
Sure.
yes, it really had grown on me, and I was totally in the zone. I was totally in the relaxation zone. And you know that once you leave a holiday place, you're back into your normal, you know, frantic grind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even though I'm retired, you know, retirement can be busier than working life because you set yourself just as many deadlines. And so I knew I
Yes.
was coming back to that. Yes, I really would have been very happy to stay there.
Because at the end of it, it seems there's certain parts of the book where it seems like even though people were very friendly, they were they were friendly, but they didn't really want to embrace you because they really didn't know who you are. And then at the end of it, when we loop back to Maria, who was your husband's cousin,
Mm,
um, and she gave you, hey, reach out to Dimitri in Athens, and
mm,
gave you that little tidbit. You
yes.
kind of talk about how you thought, you know, all your leads have kind of dried up, and here you are again. Something just popped up. Then, this is what I meant to ask you, because she sends you this message.
Mm.
Can you talk about the symbolic of the double-headed eagle?
Oh gosh, yes, that was amazing, really, wasn't it? I
Yeah.
had been I had been seeing this double-headed eagle all over the place on Hydra.
Yeah.
You know, I saw it on a cushion in the cathedral. I saw it on doors. I saw it on marble. Yes, I kept seeing
Uh-huh.
it, and I kept thinking to myself, I must ask Maria, what does that stand for? And eventually, I don't know if it was Maria or I managed to Google it or who told me, but they
Mm-hmm.
said yes, it was East and West, and it was Orthodox and, you know, and Roman
Mm-hmm.
Catholic, sort of the two sides, past and future even. And actually, this morning I was listening to a podcast that said it's also the symbol of the Russian Romanovs, which was interesting to me. But anyway,
Mm.
so yes, that double-headed eagle kept coming up everywhere. And I kept just thinking, a bit like the black cat and the black dog, I just kept thinking about it without tumbling to the fact that it might mean something. And it wasn't until I got to Athens and was following that lead that Maria had given me, and I walked into the office that belonged to the Genealogical Association in Athens, and the
Mm-hmm.
caretaker had said to me, no, they're not here, except he couldn't speak English and I can't speak Greek. But I was thinking he was saying they're not here. I didn't know if they have left the building or they're closed
Right.
today. I wasn't sure. But and I looked up then at the thing that had a list of tenants, and I saw
Yeah.
then the double-headed eagle up there. My eye went straight up to a double-headed eagle and looked next to it. And yes, that was the Genealogical Association. And that, that was another pointer to me. Don't give up on this. Don't keep
Mm-hmm.
at this. Even if he's hard to find, keep at this because it's pointing you. Everything's pointing you in this direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And then you finally get in touch with Dimitris
yes.
Malviaderos,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, and he's the genealogist for this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he says to you, when you tell him what you're doing, he says, what a coincidence. I'm writing a book about the family as well.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's like, so this is why imagine this. You spent 2 weeks on this island. If she knew this guy, you could have been like, oh, let me get him on the phone now. You would have,
Yes.
you would have been off the island in 3 days, right? But
Yes.
if that had happened, but think about this. If that had happened, think about everything you would have missed on the island.
Well, exactly. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because then
Yeah.
I would have gone straight to the answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. The island gave me a lot more than just uh, facts. It gave,
Yeah.
I absorbed that island really, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Mm,
again, like everything happens for a reason. To
exactly.
speculate. Maybe next time you go to the back to Hydra, you let me know. We fly out there with you, and we'll be your interpreters for you. You know?
Oh, that would be fantastic. I went back last year, actually. I was booked to go back during COVID, and of course that
Yeah.
didn't happen. And then I went back last year, and I did a writing retreat actually on the island,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was with an American writers retreat company called Write Away Europe, which is the most fabulous writing retreat.
Yeah.
But yes, so I saw Maria, and I saw Eleni and Panagiotis and Katerina. It was wonderful
Yeah.
to go back. So I'd be very pleased to have some interpreters. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, I'll get you the family discount when I come with you.
Fantastic.
You know, in your book, oh, just to make this note, there is. I don't want to call it a sequel to this book, but there is a follow up coming out soon,
There sure is. Absolutely. And I've
and that's
been
how.
writing that for the entire 7 years since then.
Yeah, yeah. Which I'm
Mm,
looking for. It's called The Son of Hydra, right?
it is, yes. And it's all
Yeah,
about Geekus.
yeah. And it kind of where this book was, I think he was more Geekus was more of a the undertone of this book where it told more about your experiences, even though you went to this, but it's more about you're rediscovering your love for writing. It seems like.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And to begin with, this started off as a diary, and then
Uh huh.
last year, it was after that writing retreat on Hydra that I started to think,
Mm-hmm.
I think I could take that diary that I wrote when I went to Hydra the
Mm-hmm.
first time and turn it into a travel memoir. And
Mm-hmm.
by that time, too, I had studied writing for 7 years. I haven't stopped learning the
Mm-hmm.
craft since then. And so I realised that the diary that I wrote then wasn't enough. A
Mm-hmm.
memoir needs to have a character arc in it as well. And of course, it was then that
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it and thought, well, there was a very clear character arc for me in that diary,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Sure.
changed from a cattle growing garden designer into embracing myself as a writer and being prepared to call myself a writer. And so, yes,
Yeah.
it did change me in that way.
Yeah. Was there anything that you experienced any with any individuals or any interactions that you had on the island that weren't in the book?
No, not really, because I'm not a private person at all, Peter. So whatever
Mm-hmm.
happens to me, I share it on the page. I
Mm-hmm.
don't hold anything back. And so, no, absolutely everything that happened to
Mm-hmm.
me, I put into it. And I think that's why readers appreciate that you're not holding yourself back, that you're actually
Yeah.
telling them everything, down to your self-doubt,
Yeah.
to your hopes, to your dreams. Yes, so no, it's all there, warts and all.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think if you can go back in time, you can ask Geekus something. What would you ask them?
Oh my goodness, well, knowing now that he was a very wealthy ship owner's son, I'd say
Mm-hmm.
to him, why did your father disown you? I mean, I know what I think, but I would love
Hmm.
him to tell me exactly what happened to make his father disown him. I'd love to know, am I right? You know, in the way and really, when you write a work of historical fiction like this, it's only one possible version out of thousands of, millions of possible versions. And so I'd
Yeah,
like to know how close I get to the truth in Son of Hydra, when I tell his
yeah,
story. Yes.
yeah. If I had to speculate on that, on why he was kind of taken out of the family tree, if I had to guess, I think if he did not get arrested and ended up going shipped to Australia, I don't think that happened. I think it was probably the public shame that came out of it that probably led to him being kind of, silenced in the history, in the family
Mm,
lineage there. If I had
yes.
to guess that, because I'm sure there was shame, especially if they're in an affluent family. I can
Yes.
imagine being like, his father being, "You did what? Are you
Exactly.
kidding me? You're dead to me,"
Exactly.
something like that.
And
What I
on
would
that,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
I was
No, no,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say, and on that subject, I kept wondering. One of the first questions I made a list of questions before I ever went to Hydra, and one of them was, what happened to that ship after they were arrested? And I
Yeah.
couldn't find out, and I couldn't find out. It didn't matter what I did, I couldn't find out. Was it in Malta? Did it go home to Hydra? What happened to it? And it was a couple of years later that I was looking in a gazette called the Niles Register, I think it was, an English
Mm-hmm.
a magazine. I wasn't looking for this at all. And I suddenly noticed the sale of a ship, and it was the Heracles, I think. And when you translate Greek spelling into English, like Heracles, spelt with
Yeah.
Herakles, and then you get ER. And then ERAKLIS. There's about
Mm-hmm.
50 different spellings. And there was a
Sure.
spelling there that I had never thought of. And I found where that ship had been sold for £2,000 or some very handsome amount, with the
That's a lot of
proceeds
money. Yeah.
going to the pirate ship captain, I mean, the anti-pirate ship, the English
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
crew.
Yeah.
Yes, and I thought, well, if you lose a family ship like that, and it's your cousins, yes, you could be in hot water, I think, with your
Yeah.
father.
100%. So finally, let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like we earlier we talked about. This has been going on, the discussion, for about 20 years. But if you can go back to 2017, the day you got, maybe the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve,
Yes.
and slip yourself a note, what would you say to yourself before your husband even gives you the gift to go?
I think I'd say keep going. Don't give up. Trust yourself. You can do it. I think that's what I'd say, because every step of the way,
Mm-hmm.
you come upon problems, you come upon obstacles to what it is that you're thinking of doing. And if you just stick at it, if you just absolutely don't give up, you will get there in the end. I mean, this time last year, if you had told me I'd have a best-selling book when I didn't even have a book this time last
Mm-hmm.
year, that I just wouldn't have believed you. And yet,
Yeah.
that has happened because I've just kept going. And I guess that's what most people will tell you, isn't it? Just keep going. Trust yourself. Whatever's
Mm-hmm.
been buzzing in your brain, and while your cautious self says one day, or no, I can't do that, uh, don't stop. Don't stop to wonder if you're too old, or you're not brave enough, or you're not ready. You are.
Mm-hmm.
Don't die wondering. What's the worst thing that can happen if you say yes? I think that's what I'd
Mm-hmm.
say to myself.
That's great advice. If you don't have faith in yourself, nobody's gonna have faith in you.
No, exactly.
you know. So, Shelley, when can we expect Son of Hydra to be released?
Peter, there's two answers to that question. If I can find a traditional publisher, I'm
Uh-huh.
not quite sure, because when you find a publisher, they could take a year, couldn't they? It's ready to
Sure.
go now. So I think I'll wait just a couple of months to see if I can find a publisher. If I can't, I'm going to
Uh-huh.
publish it in November, the same as I did with Hydra in winter. And so
Uh-huh.
it will be this year if I don't find a publisher.
Okay, perfect. Perfect.
Great.
Do you think something like this, did you ever think about the opportunity for you to put the two books together and write a screenplay and potentially have it produced into some sort of documentary or a movie maybe?
I like the way you think, Peter. I haven't thought of any such thing, but it sounds very interesting.
I think it would, even if you just make a documentary out of it,
Yeah.
where you bring in all the characters that are in the book and those that helped you, and you go to the island and you film it on the island.
Oh, I like
Um,
it better and better with you as my interpreter.
hey, I'll come and film it for you.
Fantastic.
But I think it's one of those stories. It's not just a Greek story. It's an Australian story as well.
Yes, exactly.
Uh, it's especially when we talk about the early penal colonies that made Australia, was the foundation of the early population of Australia.
Yes,
So yeah, food for thought, food to think about something down the road.
certainly will. Thank you. I could fancy myself as a movie star, actually. I don't know
We
what
know,
part
we
I
know,
have.
we know people.
Yeah, we know people. Well, listen, Shelley, thank you for taking the time to sit with us. Like we said to you off air, we love the book. We look forward to the Son of Hydra. I think it's going to be just as spectacular as the Hydra in winter. And that can be, is that on Amazon?
Yes, it is on Amazon. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So
Mm.
people can find it there. So for Baklava and Banter, I am Petraki. That's Soto. Shelley Dark, thank you once again for sitting with us.
So much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you both.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you. You're a phenomenal author, and we truly mean that.
Thank you.
So everybody be good to each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.